In the vast tapestry of human history, moments of turmoil and intervention serve as reminders of the complexities of power, sovereignty, and resilience. Grenada is confronted not only with the tangible scars of military intervention in 1983, but also with the intangible spirit of human perseverance despite adversity. What unfolds is not merely a narrative of political upheaval and conflict, but a profound exploration of the human spirit's capacity to endure, adapt, and transcend. We are compelled to ponder timeless questions of justice, morality, and the inherent tension between sovereignty and intervention. This episode takes us on a journey where the drama of history becomes a canvas upon which we contemplate the nature of resilience, the complexities of power dynamics, and the enduring quest for peace and stability in an ever-changing world.
The short-lived reign of the RMC came to a dramatic end on the morning of October 25, 1983, when 500 airborne Rangers and U.S. Marines landed at the Point Salines Airport at the southeastern point of Grenada.
This is episode 18 of Resilience of the Spice Isle. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for joining us. We continue in the second half of October of 1983. The world is observing the rapid turn of events in the Spice Isle. Caribbean leaders continue to deliberate. Edward Seaga is the Prime Minister of Jamaica during this period. He was one of the Caribbean leaders who showed great empathy and was forceful in his pronouncements.
In all of this, the real losers are the Grenadian people. It must be our hope, and one that we have an obligation to do everything to fulfill, that they will shortly, once again, enjoy the right to live their lives in freedom. In the meantime, our hearts go out to all of them.
Early the morning of 25 October, the Army Assault Force began its operation on the island of Grenada.
So we are on the house arrest. And October 25th, that's when the Americans landed, where from my vantage point, where we were on the hill, Richmond Hill, I was able to see the paratroopers landing from the plane. It was surreal. I realized here this is a real war. And because I lived just about 100 meters from one of the Fort Frederick, where there was anti-aircraft guns firing at this reconnaissance plane that the Americans had sent out early that morning, it was a hot spot. And then I was able to stay from Richmond, where we lived, looked out into the outer harbor, and saw these fighter bombers leaving and coming and dropping bombs on the fort. Every bomb that fell shook the entire house. I mean, I have never been so frightened and so fearful for my entire life. In fact, a number of neighbors came home. We had a little downstairs, and 15 of us gathered into this room in the bottom there, because you feel every time a bomb is going to drop on that house. That's how traumatic it was.
I was kind of a news buff, so I kept in touch with all the news from Radio Antilles, and Radio Antilles was the news station of the day in Grenada. And before the revolution, Radio Grenada was called Radio Lionel, because they always gave Gary's perspective. You never knew what was the truth or not the truth. When the revolution came, Radio Free Grenada became almost in that same vein, because they only carried the revolution's view. So many Grenadians, all over Grenada, Radio Antilles and the stations in Trinidad and the CBC and VOB actually became kind of the go-to stations when you wanted truth or real information. We would have people like Alistair Hughes, George Worm at the time, who were reporting, but under tremendous pressure as well. between that, you always heard things, there's battleships here or there. You always heard these rumors, so you think, well, Grenada, who'll come to that? We have arms and ammunition and BTRs and armored cars. Nobody can come and fight no war in Grenada. In my area where I lived in Mampanasas, there was an army camp not far away. And they moved a lot of their army equipment into an area maybe about half a mile from our house. It was a residential area. So it was peculiar to see all these armored cars and so on in the area. And by the morning of the 25th, very early in the morning, I would say 4:30, 5 o'clock, you heard a lot of shouting of commands and so on. And you heard these armored cars moving out of the area. And then this droning sound that you heard was followed by a lot of gunfire, helicopter traffic, jet traffic. Very scary period of time. You just were not sure. I mean, there were people who were in helicopters in what appeared to be non-American style of throwing up pamphlets to say, surrender, put down your weapons, or whatever it was. They flew quite low, I remember that. They flew over our house. We have stories of our dogs that disappeared because of the sound. People were very, very scared as to what was happening because, of course, if you had National Army outside your house and you had Americans and there was Radio Free Grenada now saying the block all roads and all that and encouraging people to fight to the death. Clearly, if you were not in those circles, you were clearly very confused as to what exactly will be the outcome of all this.
It was a lot of firepower. We had F-16 bombers. We had warships outside of Grenada, including USS Guam, USS Saipan. There were at least 15 in the waters outside of Grenada. It was a major operation.
I was in Carriacou still. So I recall being in Bellevue South, that's on the south of the island, the part closest to Grenada. So from there, you could have seen all the military jets, all the bombers and the battleship coming from Barbados, because Barbados is just to the east of Carriacou there, and St. Vincent. So you see all this movement going down to Grenada. That was about 5 o'clock in the morning. And you see those jets just passing. And we wonder what was happening. By then, we start seeing all the jets moving in almost about 100 in sequence. And we realized something was up. And when we tuned in, we heard that, this guy, he was Hostin. He was saying, pick up your gun and let's defend. Let's let them come and we'll bury them in the sea.
The U.S. had about 6,500 soldiers sent. We had about 400 people trying to defend us. That was basically what was available at the time. As to whether that much came out, we're not 100% sure. And understandably, not as much because of the conflict at that point. The Prime Minister is dead. What are you necessarily fighting for? There were people who came out and fight.
Of course, because of Bishop being killed, a lot of people did not want to respond. When the RMC, the Revolutionary Military Council, called people out and say, hey, time to come and fight, a lot of people didn't show up because they had also taken away guns and stuff from some of the staunch supporters of Bishop. So I think the response that they got was very limited in responding to the invasion. It was no longer Americans invaded, but you had already just executed the most important person to them. And they were not willing to fight for that revolution because they saw it as having collapsed when on the 19th. So in terms of the landscape and how it aided that, I'm not sure that I can really come up with an argument to support that or not. I'm just in thinking of where the U.S. invaded and the points that it took. The primary place was Point Celine, the airstrip, because that would have allowed them to land their own planes. So they had to land and remove the drums and stuff that were placed on it. So they were the first ones to land that many military planes on the runway at that point. Then Pearls Airport, which was the existing airport at the time, was taken over by them easily.
Our mission at that time was to seize this airfield, destroy any enemy positions in the area so that we could begin a buildup of Army forces in the area and push further north. Army assault forces received anti-aircraft and small arms fire as they came into the area. The 8 C-130s were all hit by that fire as they came in, but the assault continued and the force was put on the ground. A couple hours out of Point Salinas, we were informed that the airfield had been sufficiently cleared and was of sufficient length to take C-141 aircraft. we assault landed into Point Salinas Airfield and began the buildup of the 82nd Airborne Division Force. Several enemy contacts were made throughout the area with Grenadian, but mostly Cuban troops. Cuban troops in uniforms, Cuban troops with Soviet weapons, and an extensive anti-aircraft fire met us, Soviet anti-aircraft fire met us as we came into the area. It was over very quickly in the initial assault. The assaulting units reached the medical students, secured them, moved on through the area. We continued to build up our force in the area, continuing to push the enemy northward. We received information that there were some students being held at part of the medical college located up here on Grand Anse Beach. All this time, as we're pushing through, we're uncovering Soviet equipment, fighting isolated pockets of Cuban soldiers, and moving forward to expand the airhead line. This time, I'd like to take you up and show you a few of the weapons caches that we've found.
The trip to an area some 2.5 miles outside Point Salines revealed the nature of war. These Grenadians had been forced to abandon their homes because of the intense military action in that area. Our guide into that area was Major Jim Holt, who'd been involved in 2 extensive mopping up operations around Point Salines.
What we have here is what we believe to be a significant logistical complex. It was manned by Cubans, approximately 200. My unit secured this area yesterday morning. And I think this kind of, you will see that it will kind of refute any claim that this was just a workforce with day labor in mind. You'll find old weapons and you'll find new ones. Some still in Cosmoline that bear the USSR marking, and some that show Cuban marking. This is the newest AK-47 that the Soviets have, as is their equivalent of our US M60 machine gun here. And we'll find crates of these as we tour this particular building.
Jesus, look at these things from the Revolution.
Brand new. And this entire bank.
There are different interpretations as to the need for such heavy weaponry in Grenada. Whereas the United States argues that Grenada and Point Salines in particular were being used as a base for the Soviet and military activity, the Cubans and the former People's Revolutionary Government regime argue that the equipment was necessary to protect the revolution from American imperialism.
Cuban diplomat Ivan Martinez told a news conference in Barbados that only about half a dozen Cubans are still holding out in Grenada. And he defended Cuba's large weapon shipments to Grenada.
We are talking about the right of the people. Even the Grenadian people have the right to arm themselves. Why not?
While Martinez blasted the American intervention in Grenada, a sharply contrasting judgment came from Jamaican cabinet member Anthony Abrams.
Without the United States assistance, there would have been a bloodbath in this area and a communist takeover. I think the big plus that's going to come out of this is that the people of the Caribbean are going to understand now that America really are their friends.
The American major here, Major Jim Holt, argued that the weapons stored in the 6 warehouses which adjoined the Cuban living quarters could possibly equip 2 large divisions. He noted the arms were seized in 2 operations which were carried out shortly after the American forces landed at Point Salines. It was on the way from these ammunitions dumps that we met Nancy Weir. Nancy, what were you doing in Grenada?
I was on vacation. I came here to get engaged.
when did you realize that something was wrong?
On Wednesday, when my boyfriend was supposed to go into the hospital to the clinic, and he was told not to go there because there was going to be trouble in there. And that was the day that Bishop was assassinated.
Did you hear any firing?
We heard a lot of firing. We saw smoke, we saw helicopters landing, we saw everything. It was awful. We smelled the gunpowder from the house. We were scared.
How near were you to Point Celine?
To where?
Point Celine, the airport here.
Oh, quite a few miles.
Were you at any time approached by any soldiers?
No. We were up in a house high in the mountains, and they weren't near us. Except last night we did hear, we don't know, it was some Grenadian around. There's an apartment downstairs of the house, and there was somebody around there. We were all on mattresses on the floor, scared.
The grim reality of the situation remained ever present with the booming guns and sporadic small-bore fire. Despite this, we managed to reach Major Collis Barrow of the Barbados Defense Force. You arrived on Tuesday morning. Yeah, what have been your responsibilities and the responsibilities of the Barbadian Defense Force members since you arrived?
Our responsibilities were to ensure that the refugees and the detainees were kept in order, that the refugees and the detainees were properly fed, and that they're looked after in general.
Now, I noticed that a large portion of the Barbadians are not here on the compound right now. Where are they located?
Well, they're at headquarters, battalion headquarters.
Are you at liberty right now to disclose where that is?
It's not very far from here. It's just about half a mile from here.
Have they been at all involved in any fighting up to this stage?
No actual fighting, no actual fighting.
Okay, how do you assess the situation right now?
Well, here where we are, it is fairly quiet, but on the outskirts, you'll find that the Americans are doing a wonderful job, and they are actually getting the Cubans and some of the members of the Grenada Army to surrender. We have recovered a considerable amount of weapons, and these weapons are being stored around the battalion headquarters. I think that the refugees are quite happy so far. They have expressed thanks to the various police forces and the American troops for coming in at this time and for helping them.
There is, of course, a gunfire which is now going in the background. Have you been, at any extent, affected by this?
No way at all.
Today, yet more people have been displaced as the fighting continues. The Canadians were finally evacuated as efforts continue to find a political solution to the current crisis. The number of injured and dead continued to rise as the region and the world as a whole mourn the tragedy that is Grenada today.
It was not an invasion. Actually, 4 Navy SEALs died even before the invasion began. You don't hear Navy SEALs dying. Yeah, they tried to get on the island a few days before the invasion, and they drowned off, I think it's off Point Celine. The seas were really rough. Again, they may have underestimated. So it really was not, America invaded with tourist maps and things like that. So it was not a well-planned and orchestrated. It was, when they finally invaded and they attacked the camp, they bombed it, and then they went in with Black Hawks and stuff. They crashed into each other. A bunch of Americans killed each other, in that process, and then they got there and the camp was empty. There were lots of issues with the invasion in terms of it was bungled. Paratroopers were falling from the sky in broad daylight and stuff like that. 19 Americans killed, many of them friendly fire. There were lots of issues with the invasion itself. So I think it was chaotic, it was badly planned, it was hurried, all of those things. And one would say America came off well in terms of how they were able, within 3 days, to capture the island.
There was this sign of relief. I don't think Grenadians cared who came, All they were glad somebody came to rescue this trauma that we were going through. And I remember when these people came and then you had these helicopters. Well, that was strange to us. So even though it was fighting and somebody running outside because we wanted to see helicopters, we now custom with this set of helicopters. And then when we were looking at the horizon, you saw soldiers coming on this rope and I mean, just how you see it in the movies, and it's coming down over the sea, and they're coming down, holding this rope to come down, and they coming down this thing, and it was just a spectacle. And on top of our sadness, it was beauty to behold. We didn't accustom with that. But in the night time, when the fighting started and then continued, I must say, and then you heard this shooting, and then they said they was trying to bomb up some bridge close to us. So when they were bombing the bridge, and then all the little pieces of stone, and you had this thing falling down on the house, you said, Lord, well, the house go mash up, because it was, we walked over pretty close. And then you had this, and I remember my two sisters run below the bed because they say if anything, well, they can't catch them below the bed. And I remember this shower of stones, particles just kept coming down on the house. They trying to break it, but they couldn't make it to the bridge. I think the bridge was too strong because it was day bright and all. Next morning we went and the bridge was standing. You saw little chips and stuff, but it was standing. And then we said, well, let us go downtown now to see. The American soldiers made a joke and said, the Grenadian people, gun was shooting, we were milling about all about, but as soon as the rain started, we disappeared. That was a joke among them. They said we don't fight anything except rain, which is true.
By the afternoon, all the traffic had come out of the area where we lived. There was one armored carrier that was left. And then by that time, word started getting around of the fighting that had taken place all over the country, and how many American helicopters were shot down and those kinds of issues. It was interesting because when that actually started happening, people actually started leaving where they were, even if the Americans had taken up positions and put up roadblocks and all the rest of it. People actually went out to see what was going on. There were people in cars driving to town. I was stopped by the Americans at least twice because they told me I looked like a Cuban because of my color, I suspect. And they would walk up to you, even in the village, when we started to walk out in the village to see what was going on around us, the Americans would come up to you and start talking Spanish. And there were friends of mine from Montreal who looked Caucasian or who looked Hispanic, and they arrested one of them 2 or 3 times because they looked like a Cuban. And they would question you about your relationship with this person or that person. And they were obviously searching for the leaders of the revolution at the time.
After the shooting and the killings and then you start to hear the list of who and the sadness, and when the Americans came and they saved us, and then they started to round up all those what we in the time what we say was the bad people. They started to round up the soldiers, and who were hiding and who was busily burying their guns, and they didn't want to give it up. And the soldiers tell them, everybody outside with guns, bring them in. Because at the time they kept making the announcement on the radio, bring all your guns. Some bravely went, and some, I don't know if they thought probably they'll have a next revolution. So who was burying the gun? I remember one fella distinctly said he went up somewhere on the western side and say he go and he bury his gun. He say he bury his gun, he fold it up in what he say he fold it up in? He fold it up in oil rag or some kind of thing. So and he did something and he buried it. So later on he could always go and retrieve it. And a couple of them did that. I don't know what they thought, but they buried the guns. I remember this one particular soldier who was my friend. He said go and bury gun. He did bury it. I don't know what happened to it because he was arrested afterwards, and I don't know what happened to them, you know. That is strange. Because in those days, too, you're pretty young. To me, all the excitement that I had, all this excitement gone. So I wasn't too much into all the other serious things. My sister and I said, let us go by the hospital. Because at the time, the mortuary was where you could have gone in the mortuary and see who died. And we were passing, and I said, let us go in the mortuary and see who we see. And I remember the first person I saw lying on that slab was a friend of mine called Church. And I said, hey, look, Church. And we looked at him, and he was shot in his back. Because he was lying. Anyway, he was a bullet hole in his back, and look, blood was still running out. And I remember my sister turned him over to see. Because I don't know what people was, but he alone was lying on this slab, and that is how I knew he died. Because I remember the night before, these soldiers were passing by, and I remember he came into our house and he asked us if we were frightened and if we wanted him to come and keep us company. And I said, but we were so frightened, we said, it's all right, that's okay with them. We're going to lock the door and we're going to make it. And that's the last time I saw him. The next morning, when I went to the hospital in the mortuary, he was lying there. And I said, Lord, if I had told the boy to come and stay with us, maybe he, I don't know, maybe he might have been, he must have been scared to death for him. Because it's afterwards I realized these people were young people. They were all young people in their 22 and 23. So he must have been scared. Maybe he just wanted to have a way to come to run. Anyway, he died.
We have instances where soldiers would have left home and never came back. And bodies, again, have never been found. Yep, they were not given burial, proper burial. And that is one of the things that Grenada is still wrestling with. Because if we get to the bodies of the Prime Minister and so on, we know that they got to Calivini. We know that the process of burning has started. We know that they were moved. And we know that they were taken to St. George's University and then they disappeared. There's a lot of different theories as to what happens after. And one of the theories is you don't, if you're trying to end this whole socialism situation, you don't want any martyrs. You don't want any place where people can congregate around the remains of this Prime Minister and use him as a martyr. So there's that theory that the bodies would have been disposed of. Yep. Whatever the situation is, there are mothers whose children left home and did not come back. 11 years old, 16 years old. There are wives who never saw their husbands again. And that loss of life without any sort of closure has remained an issue for Grenada, even up to now. And you see it even up to now with students. So they have SBAs to write, and they try to speak to persons within their community or even family members. And you get one of two responses. One response is joy as to what we had then. The other response is, I don't want to talk about this because of the emotion that comes with speaking about what happened, because of the fact that I would have lost a member of the family, a friend, or something like that. In my own experience, I have two very close friends who lost a father in one case and an uncle in the other case. And it's not a conversation that they can have easily up to now. And these are people of my age group. And it's because they never had that closure. You never had a body to bury. You don't know where that person ended up. Yeah? So that part of us is still an issue. It's an issue to the point where in traveling to Jamaica and marking Cape, having conversations and recognizing that Grenada Revolution was part of the curriculum and it was not for Grenada. That aspect of our history we're not talking about, we're not discussing, students have no idea. I meet students at St. George's University in their 20s and they don't have a clue, and it's not their fault. That part of us we have just kept very quiet, very silent. We don't talk about it.
If resilience of the Spice Isle begins this process, then its mission is accomplished. This has been Resilience of the Spice Isle. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for your time.